I felt a knot forming in my stomach as I stared at the crumpled receipt lying on the kitchen counter. It was for an exquisite diamond necklace from Cartier, totaling over $10,000. I recognized the date, our 5th wedding anniversary, just a week ago. Nate had claimed he couldn't afford to buy me a lavish gift this year due to some unexpected business expenses. Yet here was the undeniable proof that he had splurged on an extravagant piece of jewelry. But for whom? My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. Perhaps this was meant to be a surprise gift for me after all? No, that couldn't be right. Nate would never go to such lengths to hide a present meant for his own wife. A sinking feeling settled in the pit of my stomach as the most logical, yet gut-wrenching explanation surfaced. He had bought this for someone else, another woman. I felt nauseous at the mere thought of Nate being unfaithful. Our marriage had always been so strong, built on a foundation of trust, love, and unwavering commitment. Or so I had believed. Doubt and suspicion began to creep in, casting dark shadows over the picture-perfect life I thought we had built together. Lost in my troubled thoughts, I barely registered the sound of the front door opening and closing. Nate strolled into the kitchen, his usual charming smile faltering when he noticed the pained expression on my face. "Lila, what's wrong, honey?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. I steeled myself, clutching the damning receipt as I met his gaze squarely. "I think you have some explaining to do," I stated, my voice trembling ever so slightly. "A surprise gift for our anniversary, perhaps? Or for someone else?" Nate's eyes widened as he realized what I held in my hand. For a moment, he seemed lost for words, scrambling to find a plausible excuse, but I could see the truth etched across his features, truth I had been willfully blind to until now. The betrayal cut deep, shattering the illusion of the perfect life I had so naively believed in. As the first tears streamed down my cheeks, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Over the next few weeks, my suspicions about Nate's infidelity only grew stronger. He started working late more frequently, claiming he needed to put in extra hours to close some big deals. But his excuses sounded hollow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying to me. One evening, after another of his supposed late nights at the office, I decided to follow him. I trailed his car from a safe distance, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and anticipation. To my dismay, instead of heading to the office, Nate drove into the heart of the city and pulled up outside a sleek, upscale apartment building. I watched, frozen in disbelief, as he got out of the car and entered the building without a backward glance. My worst fears had been confirmed. He was having an affair. Tears of anger and betrayal stung my eyes as I sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. When Nate finally emerged 2 hours later, looking disheveled and flushed, I knew exactly what he had been up to. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, and I could barely contain the overwhelming surge of emotions, hurt, rage, and a burning desire for revenge. From that day on, I became a woman possessed, determined to gather as much evidence of Nate's deception as possible. I installed a GPS tracker on his car and began meticulously documenting his movements, building an undeniable case against him. "Where were you last night?" I confronted him one morning as he was getting ready for work. Nate froze, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. "I told you, I had to work late on the Henderson deal," he replied smoothly, but I could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. "Cut the crap, Nate," I spat, tossing a stack of printouts onto the dresser. "I know you've been seeing someone else. These are the GPS coordinates from your car, showing all the times you've been at that apartment building downtown." Nate's face drained of color as he realized he'd been caught red-handed. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words, but then his expression hardened. "All right, fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been having an affair. But it's not like our marriage has been perfect either, Lila. We've been drifting apart for years." His words felt like a slap in the face, but I refused to let him see how deeply they cut me. "Don't you dare try to justify your infidelity," I snarled. "You made a vow, Nate, a vow you clearly had no intention of keeping." Nate opened his mouth to protest, but I silenced him with a look of pure contempt. "Save it. I want you out of this house by the end of the week, and don't even think about trying to hide any assets from me. I'm going to take you for everything you've got." As he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. The gloves were off, and I was just getting started. A few days after my explosive confrontation with Nate, I made another damning discovery that solidified my resolve for vengeance. While clearing out his belongings from the bedroom closet, a crumpled letter fluttered to the floor, caught between the folds of one of his coats. My heart sank as I instantly recognized the looping, feminine handwriting. It was from his mistress. With trembling hands, I unfolded the letter and began to read, bile rising in my throat with every saccharine word. It was a sickening declaration of love and devotion. The woman, Corinne, her name was, gushing about how Nate was the only man she had ever truly loved, and how she couldn't wait to build a future with him. By the time I reached the end, hot tears of rage were streaming down my cheeks. The audacity of this woman, thinking she could just swoop in and steal my husband right from under my nose. And Nate, that lying, cheating snake. How could he have betrayed me like this after everything we'd been through together? I didn't even realize Nate had come home until I heard his voice behind me. "Lila, what are you?" He stopped short when he saw the crumpled letter in my hands, his face draining of color. "So this is the woman you've been screwing behind my back?" I spat, waving the letter in his face. "Corinne? Is it? Well, isn't that just precious?" Nate held up his hands in a placating gesture, his expression a pathetic mix of guilt and desperation. "Lila, please. Let me explain." "Explain what exactly?" I cut him off, my voice thick with contempt. "How you've been lying to me for God knows how long, how you've been carrying on an affair with this tramp while I've been at home, foolishly believing in our vows?" "It's not like that," Nate pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. "I never meant to hurt you, Lila. I still love you, I swear. It was just a stupid mistake, a moment of weakness. Please, can't we work through this? I'll end things with Corinne, I promise. Just give me another chance." For a brief moment, the anguish in his voice almost swayed me. Almost. But then I remembered the cold, hard evidence of his deceit, and a fresh wave of fury washed over me, hardening my resolve. "Save your crocodile tears, Nate," I snarled, tossing the crumpled letter aside with disdain. "You had your chance, and you blew it. I want you out of this house by tomorrow morning, or I swear to God I'll have the police escort you out." Nate opened his mouth to protest, but the look in my eyes must have stopped him. He knew there was no point in arguing. I was done, finished with his lies and betrayal. With a defeated slump of his shoulders, he turned and left the room without another word. As I watched him go, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was overshadowed by a newfound determination. Nate and his precious Corinne might think they had won, but I was just getting started. They had no idea what kind of reckoning was coming their way. After kicking Nate out, I knew I couldn't just sit back and wallow in my anger and hurt. No, I needed to take action, to hit him where it would hurt the most. And what better way to do that than to go straight to the source of his infidelity? I did some digging and managed to track down Corinne's address and phone number. A part of me couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction at the thought of confronting the woman who had so brazenly stolen my husband. She was going to regret ever getting tangled up with Nate. A few days later, I showed up unannounced at Corinne's apartment, a fake smile plastered on my face. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in surprise. "Lila, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice laced with a mixture of guilt and apprehension. "Corinne, hi, I'm so sorry to drop by like this," I said, feigning innocence. "I just wanted to talk to you about something." She hesitated for a moment, but eventually stepped aside to let me in. As I entered her apartment, I couldn't help but take in the tasteful decor and expensive furnishings, so this was the kind of lifestyle my husband's mistress was living. "Can I get you something to drink?" Corinne offered, clearly trying to be polite despite the awkward situation. "No, thank you," I replied, taking a seat on her plush couch. "I won't be staying long." Corinne sat down across from me, her body tense with anticipation. "So, what did you want to talk about?" I took a deep breath, carefully schooling my features into an expression of concern. "Corinne, I'm really worried about Nate. Ever since our separation, he's been acting so strange. He's been drinking a lot, and he's even started talking about quitting his job. I'm afraid he's spiraling out of control. Corinne's brow furrowed as she processed my words. What are you saying, Lila? I'm saying that I think he's still deeply in love with you, I continued, my voice thick with faux emotion. And I'm worried that if things don't work out between you two, it might just push him over the edge. Corinne's eyes widened in surprise, and I could see the seeds of doubt beginning to take root in her mind. But he's the one who cheated on you. Surely he doesn't expect us to just pick up where we left off? I shook my head sadly. I don't know, Corinne. All I know is that he's been absolutely devastated since I asked him to leave. He keeps saying that you're the only thing that matters to him now. It was all a lie, of course, a carefully constructed web of deception designed to sow mistrust and uncertainty in Corinne's mind. And from the way her brow furrowed and her lips pursed, it seemed to be working. I had no idea he was taking it so hard, she murmured, her voice tinged with a hint of concern. I reached out and gave her hand a gentle squeeze, playing the role of the understanding ex-wife to perfection. I know this is a lot to take in, Corinne, but I just wanted you to be aware of the situation. I'm worried about what Nate might do if he loses you too. As I stood to leave, Corinne remained seated, her expression troubled and uncertain. Mission accomplished. Outside, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The first seeds of doubt had been planted. Now it was just a matter of time before Corinne started questioning everything. Her relationship with Nate, his motives, his commitment. And when that happened, their little affair would crumble from the inside out. The game was on, and I was playing to win. After my little visit with Corinne, I could tell the wheels were turning in her head. Nate had started calling me more frequently, pleading with me to give him another chance. But I remained resolute. I had no intention of taking him back, not after the depth of his betrayal. Instead, I began putting the next phase of my plan into motion. I reached out to Corinne once again, this time extending an olive branch under the guise of friendship. Corinne, I know this is an awkward situation for all of us, I said when she answered the phone, my voice dripping with faux sincerity. But I think it's time we put the past behind us and move forward. There was a beat of silence on the other end, and I could practically hear the doubt swirling in her mind. I don't know, Lila. After what happened with Nate made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. I cut her off smoothly. But that doesn't mean we have to be enemies. In fact, I think it would be good for us to get to know each other better. Another pause, and then a tentative reply. I suppose you're right. Maybe it's time we cleared the air. I smiled to myself, knowing I had her hooked. Wonderful. Why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? We can have a proper chat, just the two of us. Corinne agreed, and I immediately got to work preparing for her visit. In addition to cooking up a delicious meal, I also made sure to have some other surprises in store, namely a set of legally binding documents that would seal both her fate and Nate's. When the night of the dinner arrived, Corinne showed up right on time, a bottle of wine in hand. As we sat down to eat, I played the part of the gracious hostess, making polite conversation and avoiding any talk of Nate or the affair. By the time we'd finished our meals, Corinne seemed completely at ease in my presence. That's when I decided to strike. Corinne, I have to be honest with you, I said, setting down my fork and meeting her gaze squarely. There's an ulterior motive behind me inviting you here tonight. Her brow furrowed in confusion, but before she could respond, I reached into my purse and withdrew a thick manila envelope. Inside here are all the details of the agreement I intend to propose to both you and Nate. Corinne's eyes widened as I slid the envelope across the table towards her. Agreement? What are you talking about? Well, we can't very well go on pretending like nothing happened, can we? I said calmly, taking a sip of wine. Nate betrayed me in the worst possible way, and you were a willing participant in that betrayal, so it's only fair that you both face the consequences. Corinne's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but I pressed on before she could formulate a response. In that envelope, you'll find a detailed account of all the evidence I've gathered against you two. Financial records, phone logs, even photos and videos, more than enough to bury you both in a very public, very messy scandal. Her face had gone deathly pale, and I could see the fear flickering in her eyes. Good. However, I continued. I'm willing to keep all of that evidence private, provided you both agree to my terms, which, simply put, are this. Nate gets nothing in the divorce. No alimony, no assets, nothing. In fact, he'll be lucky if I don't take him for every last penny. Corinne's hands were trembling now, and she looked like she might be sick. Lila, please, this is insane. Insane? I scoffed. After what you two did to me, to my marriage? No, Corinne, this is justice. And if you know what's good for you, you'll sign that agreement without any fuss. As the weight of my ultimatum sank in, Corinne dissolved into tears, burying her face in her hands. But I felt no pity, no remorse, only a cold, steely sense of determination. They had made their choices. Now it was time to face the consequences. The stage was set, the trap carefully laid. All that was left was for the players to arrive and take their places in my grand scheme of revenge. I had invited both Nate and Corinne over for dinner under the pretense of celebrating my newfound sense of closure after our separation. Of course, that was just a ruse, a way to get them both in the same room so I could expose their lies and deceit once and for all. As I put the finishing touches on the meal, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. No more anger, no more hurt, just a steely determination to make them pay for what they'd done. The doorbell rang, and I took a deep breath before answering it. Nate stood on the doorstep, looking equal parts hopeful and apprehensive. Leela, he began, but I cut him off with a wave of my hand. Save it, Nate. Just come inside. He did as I asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. A few minutes later, there was another knock at the door. Corinne, right on cue. Oh, good. You're both here, I said, forcing a bright smile as I ushered her inside. Shall we get started? We made our way to the dining room, where I had set the table with my best china and silverware. As we took our seats, the tension in the air was palpable. So, Nate began, breaking the awkward silence. What's this all about, Lila? You said something about closure? I let out a soft chuckle, meeting his gaze with a coldness that made him shift uncomfortably in his chair. Yes, closure. You could say that. Reaching into my pocket, I withdrew a small remote control and pressed a button. Suddenly, the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall flickered to life, displaying a series of damning photographs. Nate and Corinne's eyes widened in horror as they took in the images, shots of them entering and leaving Corinne's apartment building, candid photos of them embracing, even a few incriminating screenshots of text messages exchanged between them. You see, I know everything, I said, my voice deceptively calm. Every sordid detail of your little affair. The fancy dinners, the hotel room trysts, the whispered promises of a future together, I have it all documented right here. Nate's face had gone ashen, while Corinne was openly weeping, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Lila, please, I'm so sorry, Nate choked out, tears welling in his eyes. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. I never meant to hurt you like this. But you did hurt me, Nate, I replied, my tone hardening. You betrayed me in the worst possible way. And not just with some random fling, but with this. I turned my gaze to Corinne, who flinched under my withering stare. This home-wrecking little tramp who thought she could just waltz in and steal my husband. Corinne opened her mouth to protest, but I silenced her with a raise of my hand. Don't even bother denying it. I have all the proof I need right here. I tapped the remote, and the images on the screen changed to show bank statements and financial records. Not only have you been sleeping with my husband, but you've also been bleeding him dry financially. Fancy dinners, expensive gifts, all paid for with money that should have been going towards our future, not funding your little sex games. Nate's head was in his hands now, his shoulders shaking with sobs of shame and regret. But I felt no pity, no remorse, only a grim sense of satisfaction. So, here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice ringing with finality. Nate, you're going to sign these divorce papers, agreeing to give me everything, the house, the cars, your entire retirement fund, every last penny. His head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. But Lila, that's not fair. You can't just take everything from me. I leveled him with a look that could have frozen hellfire. Fair? You want to talk about fair, Nate? After what you did to me, to our marriage? No, this is the only fair outcome. Either you sign those papers and walk away with nothing, or I take this whole sordid affair public. Your family, your friends, your colleagues at work, Everyone will know what kind of lying, cheating scumbag you really are." Nate opened his mouth to protest, but the fight had already left his eyes. He knew he was beaten, outmaneuvered at every turn. With a shaking hand, he reached for the pen and papers I had laid out before him. As the scratch of his signature filled the tense silence, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold. The weight of Nate's betrayal hung heavy in the air as he slumped forward, his signature still glistening on the divorce papers before him. He had agreed to my terms, every last one of them, but the look of utter defeat on his face was almost enough to make me feel a twinge of pity. Almost, but not quite. "Well, that about wraps things up on my end," I said, sliding the papers into a crisp manila folder. "I'll have my lawyer file these first thing in the morning." Nate didn't respond, his shoulders shaking with what I could only assume were muffled sobs. Beside him, Corinne sat frozen, her eyes glazed over and her makeup streaked with tears. "As for you..." I turned my attention to the woman who had so brazenly inserted herself into my marriage. "I hope you're happy with what you've done. Because of your selfish actions, you've lost Nate for good." Corinne's head snapped up at that, a flicker of defiance flashing in her eyes. "Lost him? You're the one who's taking everything from him. How are we supposed to be together now?" I let out a harsh bark of laughter, shaking my head in disbelief. "You really are delusional, aren't you? Did you honestly think there was some kind of future for you two idiots after everything that's happened?" Leaning forward, I fixed her with a steely glare. "Let me spell it out for you, sweetheart. As part of the agreement Nate just signed, he's legally prohibited from having any contact with you whatsoever. No phone calls, no emails, no visits, nothing. If he so much as breathes in your direction, I can have him thrown in jail for violating the terms." Corinne's mouth dropped open in shock, her eyes darting over to Nate for confirmation. But he refused to meet her gaze, his head still bowed in shame and resignation. You can't do that," she stammered, her voice quavering with a mixture of anger and despair. "That's not fair. You're just being a vindictive bitch." "Fair?" I echoed, arching an eyebrow. "You want to talk to me about fair, after you knowingly carried on an affair with my husband? After you helped him betray me in the most intimate way possible?" Shaking my head, I let out a humorless chuckle. "No, Corinne, what's not fair is what you two did to me. This..." I waved a hand at the paperwork in front of Nate. "This is just the consequences of your actions finally catching up with you." Pushing back from the table, I rose to my feet and smoothed out the wrinkles in my dress. "I suggest you both start getting used to this new reality, because from this moment on, you're nothing but ancient history to me." With that parting shot, I turned on my heel and strode out of the dining room, leaving the two of them to wallow in the wreckage of their shattered affair. As I ascended the stairs to the bedroom, my bedroom, not ours anymore, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction settle over me. They had made their choices, and now they were going to have to live with the fallout. If that meant losing each other in the process, well, that was just the price they had to pay. As I drifted off to sleep that night, the ghost of a smile played across my lips. Revenge, it seemed, was every bit as sweet as they said it would be. The divorce was finalized within a matter of weeks. And just like that, I was free from the shackles of my marriage to Nate, free from the lies, the betrayal, the gut-wrenching pain of discovering his infidelity. As I packed up the last of my belongings and prepared to move into my new apartment across town, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. This was my fresh start, my chance to rebuild my life on my own terms, without the weight of Nate's transgressions dragging me down. I was finally in control again, and that knowledge filled me with a newfound sense of confidence and determination. Of course, the path forward wasn't going to be easy. Nate had fought me every step of the way, bitterly contesting the terms of the divorce agreement and trying in vain to claw back some of the assets I had rightfully taken from him. But in the end, the evidence of his misdeeds was too overwhelming, and the courts had ruled decisively in my favor. As I settled into my new place, surrounded by boxes still waiting to be unpacked, my phone buzzed with a text from my best friend April. "How's the move going? Need any help getting settled?" I smiled at the thoughtful offer, quickly tapping out a reply. All good over here. Just taking a breather before tackling the rest of these boxes. A few moments later, another text came through. Have you heard from Nate at all? Or his little mistress? At the mention of Corinne's name, my jaw clenched involuntarily. I hadn't given either of them much thought since the explosive confrontation, but now that April had brought them up, I couldn't help but wonder how they were faring in the aftermath of their shattered affair. Not a peep, I responded. And if I'm being honest, I couldn't care less what either of them is up to these days. It was a lie, of course. Part of me desperately wanted to know if they had managed to salvage their twisted relationship, or if my scorched earth tactics had driven them apart for good. The thought of Nate's suffering, of finally getting a taste of the anguish he had put me through, was almost intoxicating. As if reading my mind, April's next text came through. Rumor has it Corinne dumped his cheating ass and moved across the country. Guess she realized what a sleazeball he really is. A slow, satisfied smile spread across my face as I read those words. So the little homewrecker had finally come to her senses and abandoned Nate, just as I'd hoped. Served him right after everything he'd put me through. Good, I typed back, a sense of vindication washing over me. He deserves to be completely alone after what he did. In that moment, I could almost picture it. Nate huddled in some dingy apartment somewhere, drowning his sorrows and wallowing in the consequences of his own selfish actions. The image brought me a twisted sense of joy, a feeling of cosmic justice being served. As I set my phone aside and began unpacking the nearest box, I couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for my best friend and her unwavering support through this entire ordeal. Without April's guidance and tough love, I might never have found the strength to stand up to Nate and fight for what was rightfully mine. This new chapter of my life was just beginning, and as I surveyed the blank canvas of my empty apartment, I felt a renewed sense of hope and possibility blossoming within me. The future was mine for the taking, and if Nate and Corinne's fates were any indication, karma was firmly on my side.